Hey, today on FlyWire, I'm with Brian Leale, who had an engine failure in his 210A model shortly after takeoff. And I think it's a pretty interesting story, so stick with me on FlyWire. Hey, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire, we're going to talk with Brian Leale, who had an engine failure. It looks like maybe a mile after takeoff, and he had to put it on the ground. He had to make some really quick decisions. So we're going to run through that, and it's a short flight, so this may be a short video. We'll see.
For
Brian,
sure.
run me through the incident, so the accident, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, as you mentioned, Scott, it was a short flight, shortest of my life. And probably one of the most memorable, actually. But yeah, so I was taken off out of my home airport, which was Grand Haven, Michigan. Three Golf Mike, great airport, and it was a choppy day. Basically, I was getting ready to take my plane up to Muskegon, which is basically like a 7 minute flight. I was taking it up there to get a new transponder in it. So it was just going to be a quick run up there, drop the plane off. My wife had just dropped me off. And so she took off, and I got in the plane and did my normal run up and everything, and got going. It was a little bit of a choppy day. The winds were 210, or out of 210 degrees, and then they were 25 gusting to like 33. So it was kind of choppy. And I took off on runway 18. So had a little bit of a it's a shorter runway, so but 210 it took off. I mean, we were off the runway usually about 700 feet, so it was no big deal there. I got about 400 feet in the air, and everything, it just stopped completely. No engine power, it just cut right out. And I had that shock factor, right? The instant, you're stunned, and I'm staring at the three knobs, right? All three knobs were pushed to the firewall, and I just stared at that. I remember going, "This picture is not correct. I should have the engine at this point." Once I kind of gathered it and had to make a decision real quick and looked where I was, I knew I wasn't going to be high enough to do anything. I started looking for a place to land, but I pitched down right away. But I got the airspeed where I needed it to be, about 80 miles an hour on it indicated, was my glide. And I was very surprised with the pitch at that time. It felt like I was literally pointing towards the ground. It was stunning. And I can totally understand how people get into that mode of holding that thing off, trying not to bring it in, because it felt like I was literally pushing it down to the ground. But that's where the airspeed had to be. There was just no other option. I didn't it was heavily wooded area. There was no real big openings. I saw an opening, but as I pitched for airspeed and figured out what I was getting out of that, I knew I wasn't going to make that. And so I turned back into the wind a little bit, and I saw another little opening, and I thought, well, maybe. And I said, you know what? You just got to put this thing in. And that's what ended up happening. Ended up in a heavily wooded area, started getting into the trees, and I pulled up a little bit as it started going in, and I ended up going in about 50 miles an hour, 55. And so it was pretty slow. I slowed it up good, but the right wing caught a big tree about 30 feet up in the air, and it kind of drove it into the ground from there. And I've got some pictures that we'll show here in a minute where it's uprooted a tree. It just plowed right into it and pulled the pine tree right out of the ground from the roots. But everything stopped at that point, and it was dead silent. And I moved my feet and said, "I'm getting out." and the door of the plane had popped open. There wasn't much time to do any of, all the procedural, open the doors and all this stuff, when you're going in. There just wasn't any time for that type of stuff. And so I got out of the plane and stood underneath the wing and looked back at the plane and literally said, "I'll never fly again." And I couldn't believe it. It was crazy. And I had my wife was already up in Muskegon, so I'm trying to get her on my phone. And I couldn't get my phone out of airplane mode. And unknowingly, I actually took a picture of my feet standing there and, kind of dripping on the snow at that time. And it was like, oh my goodness, what a crazy day. But honestly, the thing was, that you can totally understand how people do a stall spin, because you are in that moment. And I had just put new avionics in my plane. It was down for like 2 months. But again, going back to that urge to just want to keep this thing in the air, it's a psychological fight that you are battling, as well as trying to fly the airplane. It's like, oh, what do I conceded to the fact that I'm going to ride this thing in. And with it being a choppy day that day with the gusty winds, as I made my turn kind of back into the wind, once I found that I wasn't going to make that first initial landing zone, I turned into the wind, and with a gust, the stall horn went off. And that was the indication for me. It's like, we're not doing that today. And just pointed it into the wind and, started getting lower and lower. And I'm like, at the very end there, the last thing on my mind before I started hearing the trees rubbing against all the aluminum was, this could be it. And that was kind of a interesting moment. Um, but like I said, then everything just stopped once I hit at the bottom. And in the 210, I only had lap belts, so it was a 61. So I did get a pretty good gash on my head from hitting the dashboard, and ended up having a compression fracture and everything coming out of that too. But that type of stuff is minor compared to what could have been. The 3D from ForeFlight kind of recorded on my ADS-B. Love to share that with you and just kind of take you through that experience.
Yeah, you bet. I'd love to see that. So what I find fascinating about this is I preach about takeoff, having an engine failure, and what are the choices. When you turn back, and how do you train for that, et cetera. So you're about 400 feet. You were below the altitude that I preach, to where you even think about it. You just pick a spot out front and do the best you can. And
Yeah.
so I really like that. And the other thing that you did is that you pitched for best glide.
All right. So here is the track log. So as you can see, I'll kind of back it up a little bit. So this is Grand Haven Airport. I'll just list for us here. And as I mentioned, I was taking off runway 18, so the south departure here, doing my climb out, and I get up here, and you can see I'm going about 110, so 86 knots, 110 on the indication, the airspeed indicator. And about right here, you can see where the airspeed starts to drop. So we get about 84. This is about where the engine stopped. And again, it was there wasn't partial loss. It was as if it just shut off. Zero power. So I got a windmilling air propeller and going through that. And so as I was going through the process of trying to figure out what's happening, that's when I got to about this point here, and you can see this is where I started to pitch, and you can see the airspeed bleed off. We're already at 70 knots right there. And so we get to about here, 55, and that's where I pitched, right? So I'm pitching now for airspeed. And this is, as I mentioned,
To me, the climb speed that you want to use is a cruise climb that's above best glide speed, best above VY in particular, because even though you just took off fairly recently, what you really need is you need kinetic energy, and that's airspeed. Okay,
yep.
so you lost nearly 30 knots.
Hmm.
And that's significant because if you were at VY, you would have been at stall speed or below it. VX, you definitely would have stalled. So
Yep.
that to me is a key feature or a key fact
Mhm.
here is that you were fast enough that that whole reaction time of, well, I don't believe what happened. It takes a while to recognize it and then go to the next thing. You did that. And
Yep.
you still lost nearly 30 knots.
And as you can see, so right now I've pitched for airspeed, right? So it'll hang around 55. I mean, that's about where we're going to be. And you can see the pitch and the descent rate that I'm starting to pick up here. It's surprising. And that's where, like I said, this is what caught me by surprise. It's like this is all I'm getting. Because if you look down this line, you can see the zone I was kind of looking for. I saw this open area, but then as soon as I figured out what my pitch was going to be, I was never going to make that. There is no way I was going to make that. So then I started looking to the right and I could see this area over here, and the winds were out of this direction. So I'm like, well, I want to be pitched over there or, flying into it anyway. And that seems to be a decent spot. So as I progressed down, about here, I was like, I ain't making it. You can, it was, and I, again, look at my airspeed, consistent the whole way down. I knew that's what I had to do to maintain this flight and keep it going. And then as I got closer here, you can see I slowed it up because this is where I resolved I'm going in. And I just want to slow it up. I wasn't trying to keep it in the air or anything. I knew I was going in. And the very incredible thing, there's houses in here embedded in these woods. I had no idea. You can't see them when you're that low. All you're seeing is treetops. So you can't like pick a spot. It was dumb luck that I ended up about 100 feet from a house and I didn't hit anything when I went in. But I came in and
Did
you can
you
see
did
again
you
as the airspeed bleeds off.
did you use flaps at
I,
all, or did you think about it?
I did not. I did
Okay,
not.
that's fine.
Um, Yep, I just brought it straight in. The gear was down. It is a retractable, but short flight over to Muskegon. I was having some gear door issues anyway, so I was like, I'm just gonna leave it down. I'm gonna fly over to Muskegon. So the gear was already down, so that was just there, and in a couple. There's some benefit to having that when I hit the ground. I think the suspension and the struts gave me a little bit of protection on that. But at this point, I was going in, and this is where I basically started impacting trees. And like I mentioned, the one that brought me down, there was a big 30-foot tree that the right wing caught and just brought the plane right into the ground. And that was a big so the experience going from flying to falling is a terrifying feeling. I will say that. That was something that I won't forget. And yeah, that was a very scary moment too. Um,
Did when
but
you hit the tree with the right wing, did it spin you around?
it it spun it downward. So like I was going in and then you could hear stuff hitting. I was hitting some pines, which was great. But then it caught the right wing caught that big tree and then it drove the plane around and straight down at that point. So that was the big hit at the bottom. And I've got some pictures I can show with that too. But but this for me was the kind of the surprising and the realization of you can practice and we all practice our engine out procedures and things like this, and I go back 100 times, what could I have done differently? I mean, I flew the plane. It was a super choppy day, and when I had nothing to aim for at that point, there's just not much going on, and it happened. I think it was 43 seconds from engine out to being in the trees. That
It's
was the
not much
flight.
time.
Yeah, not a lot of time. Like I said, it was about 43 seconds from engine out um,
Yeah. So
to
what
hitting trees.
I'd like to make another observation here, if I could, is
Mhm.
so at this point when it happened, just about the time you're crossing that road, what I think
Yep.
we can glean from this is, and this is the reaction time thing. What is happening from a physics point of view is
Yep.
your vector is up, and it's going to continue up, but because you're not changing anything except without the engine, you're going to trade airspeed for that altitude.
Yep.
And that's why I'm preaching that kinetic energy is better, because then when all this happens, because you're a human, it's going to take some amount of time to make that
Hmm.
transition and to change your flight path, and you're burning energy while you're doing it. And that's why you don't fly VY, because you're going, or VX in particular, because you're just going to burn all your altitude, your airspeed, and then you're going to stall. And
Yep.
that's, you don't want to stall at that altitude. You want to stay in control. So I think that
Absolutely.
flight path is really good. It shows that ballistic flight path, shall we say.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Okay, cool.
We always talk, I guess we always wish we had practiced more or done something more so that you'd be more prepared for this situation. I'm not sure how much you can prepare yourself for these things, but I mean, it's some forethought into what you might do. So I always encourage, yes, definitely practice, you know, what you're going to do or have a plan. If your engine goes out, have a plan. One thing that I've started to do, because until my incident, I didn't realize that that was such a heavily wooded area behind or at the end of that runway. I guess I just never thought of it. And now when I'm planning flights, I do the flight thing, and I look at what's out there around these airports, so that if something were to happen, what are the areas I might be able to take advantage of. And I never did that before. I totally admit that. It's like, well, I just go forward, right? Well, now I'm a lot more aware, and I do include that in my flight planning now.
The best takeaway, I think you hit it already, is you got to be aware of your what's in front of you. You know what
Yeah,
options you have, and uh, plan ahead. And ForeFlight's really good for that, for doing that 3D thing.
absolutely.
To
Yep.
look, yeah, where are the fields that I can go to? To me, what was really interesting about this is how, it happened about 500 feet in the air, and you didn't think about turning around. You're going to go forward, and you maintained your altitude, and you picked your field out, even though it wasn't a field, and entered the trees. The airplane
Yeah,
stayed together, and everything worked out really well. So
it did.
that's good, and that's all because you flew the plane.
That's right. Yep. Fly the plane.
Yeah. So I'm glad to talk with you about it. I think there's some good lessons learned. We can all pay attention to your experience and continue to fly the plane.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for joining us. And well, that's all I have to say about that. So fly safe, and we'll see you next time on FlyWire.